She left me on the table, not literally, but close enough that the difference stopped mattering around 3 a.m. My name is Kang Junho. I am 33 years old. I am an architect. I design structures that are meant to hold things up, and I am very good at it. I was also, until approximately 6 hours ago, the husband of Dr. Seo Yerin, top cardiothoracic surgeon at Sungwon General, rising star of the department, and the most quietly devastating person I have ever known. The story I am about to tell you is not about heartbreak. Heartbreak is too warm a word for what happened. Heartbreak implies something broke clean. What she did was a surgical procedure. Precise, necessary, performed without anesthesia because she simply forgot to administer it. I had been in the hospital, room 407, Sungwon General, a cycling accident. Nothing cinematic, just a car door that opened at the wrong moment and a bicycle that wasn't fast enough to avoid it. 2 fractured ribs, a laceration along my left side that needed stitches, moderate blood loss. The attending physician said I was lucky. I had called her from the ambulance. She answered on the 3rd ring. Junho. Her voice was already moving. I could hear the shift of fabric, the sound of a door. I'm in an ambulance, I said. Sungwon General. A pause. 1 beat. 2. Then, which entrance? I told her. I heard her say something muffled, away from the phone. Something that sounded like I have to go. I thought she was telling someone she was leaving to come to me. She did not come. Room 407 was a reasonable room. A window facing north, a television mounted too high, a IV drip that ticked like a patient clock, measuring out the hours I waited. I am, by nature, a patient person. Architects have to be. You spend months designing something, and then more months watching it not exist yet, and you learn to live inside the interval between intention and reality. I waited 3 hours before I called again. She answered on the 1st ring this time. Junho. How are you? Are you stable? The attending said. You called the attending, I said. A pause. 3 seconds. In my experience, Yerin's pauses were architectural. They bore specific amounts of weight. I wanted to make sure you were being taken care of, she said. Where are you? Another pause. Different load-bearing capacity. I'm still at the hospital. This hospital. Yes. She was in the building. Somewhere in the same building, she had decided not to come to room 407. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment. Not rage, not devastation. Something smaller and colder. The kind of understanding that arrives not as an explosion, but as a quiet click, like a lock engaging from the other side. Okay, I said. That was all. 1 word, and I meant every letter of it. I set the phone face down on the side table, and I looked at the north window for a very long time. Somewhere below, in a room I later learned was the cardiac surgery consultation wing, Dr. Seo Yerin was sitting across from a man named Park Ji-hoon, her ex-boyfriend. The one she had dated for 4 years before me. The one she described, on the rare occasion she described him at all, as a chapter that had simply ended. Park Ji-hoon had been admitted earlier that evening with a cardiac episode. Arrhythmia. Serious but manageable. He was not her patient. She had transferred his care to another attending. But she had stayed. She had stayed for him while I bled 3 floors above. Rule 1, which I did not know yet, was a rule. Information is only painful if you receive it before you're ready. Collect it. File it. Use it when you are. Morning arrived the way mornings do after long nights. Not triumphantly, just inevitably. My colleague Lee Barham arrived at 7:15. He is 35, my senior partner at the firm, and the kind of person who brings coffee to hospitals without being asked because he fundamentally cannot imagine showing up empty-handed. He took one look at me and said, "Who died?" "Nobody," I said. That's sort of the problem. He sat down in the visitor's chair without asking permission. He handed me the coffee. He did not ask me to explain. This is one of Bahram's qualities I have always valued. He distinguishes between moments that require questions and moments that require presence. That morning, he understood the difference. I drank the coffee. It was too sweet. Bahram always ordered mine too sweet, a 4-year-old mistake he had never corrected. I had never told him I didn't like it that way because it never mattered enough to mention. Funny, the things you overlook. She was in the building, I said finally. Not explaining, just stating. Bahram's jaw tightened once, briefly. He nodded. Park Ji-hoon was admitted last night, I continued. Cardiac? She stayed with him? He didn't say anything for a long moment, then, what are you going to do? And here is the thing. The answer arrived without deliberation. I had been awake all night, and I had done nothing but think, and by the time Bahram asked the question, the answer was already filed, folded, and ready. I'm going to get discharged, I said. Go home, find the documents, sign them. A pause. Divorce documents? We drew them up 2 months ago during the... I stopped. It doesn't matter why. She asked. I said we'd think about it. I've thought. You're sure, Bahram said. I've been sure longer than I knew, I said. He nodded once, set down his coffee, stood. I'll drive you home. The apartment was hers, technically, or more precisely, the apartment was in both our names, but had been furnished by her tastes, arranged by her instincts, and organized by her system. I had moved into the architecture of her preferences the way tenants move into spaces. I'd rearranged nothing, only added myself. Standing in it now, I noticed things I hadn't before. There were no photographs of us that hadn't been selected and positioned by her. There were none of my design sketches on the walls, though I had offered twice. There was a key rack by the door with 4 hooks, 2 keys, hers and mine, but only her car keys occupied the space beside them. Small things. Geological, almost. The kind of evidence that only reveals a pattern when you've finally decided to look. I found the documents in the home office. Her home office, really. My drafting table occupied a corner, but the desk, the filing cabinet, the institutional order of it all was hers. The documents were in the 3rd drawer, manila folder, labeled in her precise handwriting, administrative, marriage, administrative. Rule 2. When someone has already organized your ending, have the grace to execute it well. I took the folder to the kitchen table. I made coffee, proper coffee my way, which meant slightly bitter French press, 2 minutes longer than the instructions suggested. I sat down. I read every page. The terms were clean. Fair, even. Fairer than the law required of her. Yaren had been thorough. She had given me half the apartment's equity, despite her having paid the larger portion of the down payment. She had listed no claims against my business accounts. She had been, in the way that mattered least, generous. I stared at her signature on page 7 for a long time. She had already signed. Weeks ago, probably. The document had been waiting for only my hand. I signed. My handwriting is less impressive than hers. Architects are trained to letter clearly and consistently, but my actual signature has always looked like a man in the middle of deciding something, which I suppose it was. I set the pen down, drank my coffee. It was 8:47 in the morning. I had been married to Dr. Seo Yaren for 3 years and 2 months. I had ended it over French press coffee at a kitchen table that had always been slightly too formal for anything this human. Outside, the city was doing what cities do. Trucks, a dog somewhere, the specific percussion of 10,000 lives proceeding without reference to mine. I refilled the coffee. I thought, so, what now? Not a question, more of a door opening. She came home at noon. I heard the key in the lock, and I noticed, clinically, that my body registered it the way it always had. A small internal shift, like a needle moving on a gauge. 3 years of conditioning. It would take time to recalibrate. I was sitting on the sofa. The documents were on the coffee table between us. Unsigned by her, now signed by me. Returned to the manila folder, but not closed. She saw the folder immediately. She was a diagnostician. She saw everything. "Junho," she said. "The coffee's fresh," I said. "I made enough." She crossed the room slowly. She sat in the armchair across from me. Not beside me, I noted. Never beside me on the sofa during difficult conversations. She sat where she sat when she needed distance and the architecture of the room to do some of the work. She looked at the folder. "You signed them," she said. I did. "I was going to explain," she said. "You don't have to," I said. "Junho." "Yeren." I said her name once gently. "I'm not angry." She looked at me then. Actually looked. The kind of focused, diagnostic attention she gave to imaging results she wasn't certain about. Looking for cracks that weren't there. "He could have died," she said finally. "His arrhythmia was—" "He didn't die," I said. "I know. The attending confirmed it when he discharged me this morning." She absorbed that. "You were discharged this morning? Early? Barham drove me?" "You should have called," I said. Not bitterly. Genuinely curious, the way you are curious about a theorem that doesn't prove out. "Called you." She didn't answer that. The silence between us was not uncomfortable the way silences usually are. It was a working silence. We were both, each in our own way, completing the calculation. She was the one who reached for the folder. She did not open it. She held it. "I should have come," she said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." That was the entirety of the argument. 3 years compressed into those 2 exchanges. She was a surgeon. She understood clean incisions. "I'll have my attorney handle the filing," she said. "Mine will cooperate fully." She stood. She put the folder under her arm. She turned toward the hallway, toward the bedroom that had been both of ours, that I had already, quietly, been thinking of as hers alone. She stopped once halfway across the room, her back to me. "You're not going to fight any of this," she said. Not a question. "No." She nodded once. She kept walking. Rule 3. Disappear before anyone expects you to. Your absence tells a more interesting story than your presence ever could. I went back to work on Wednesday, 3 days after the signing. The ribs were sore. The doctor had said 4 to 6 weeks, and I had mentally filed this under inconvenient and moved on. The firm was in the middle of a municipal project. A public library in Mapo, one of those city commissions that comes around every decade and becomes either the thing a career is remembered for or the thing it quietly recovers from. I had been lead architect for 11 months. I was not letting fractured ribs change that. My assistant, Osu Jin, was 26, relentlessly efficient, and constitutionally incapable of not noticing things. She had noticed the change in my marital status before I had announced anything, which I hadn't and wasn't planning to, by the simple absence of my wife's name in my calendar. She placed a coffee on my table at 9:17 without being asked. Black, no sugar. "The structural report is on your screen," she said. "The Mapo contractor wants to move the Thursday meeting to Friday." "Tuesday," I said. "I'll tell them Tuesday." She left without asking how I was. She understood that I did not need her to ask how I was. This was one of her better qualities, and I had, over 3 years, quietly depended on it. The day proceeded. I reviewed structural drawings. I argued productively with the contractor's engineer over load-bearing calculations. I ate lunch at my desk. I did not think about Yeren for approximately 6.5 hours, which I considered a reasonable result for day 3. At 4:30, Bahram knocked on my office door. He entered without waiting, which was his right as senior partner and his nature as a person who did not believe in the performative waiting the knock implied. He sat in the chair across my desk and looked at me the way you look at an equation you're not sure has resolved correctly. "People are going to notice," he said. "People notice everything," I said. "Most of it incorrectly." "You and Yeren share a circle," he said. "Sungwon's attending staff, their spouses, the Hannum dinner crowd." "I know. She's going to set the narrative before you do?" I looked at him. "What narrative would you suggest I set, Bahram?" He thought about it. "A better one." "Agreed," I said. "Now show me the structural variance on the east wall before I have to look at it alone." The thing about shared social circles is they are not, in fact, shared. They are territories with marked and unmarked borders. And the person who moves first after a separation effectively redraws the map. I had been aware of the Sungwon Hospital social orbit for 3 years. As Yeren's husband, I had attended its dinners, its charity galas, its informal gatherings in Hannum restaurants that charged the GDP of a small nation for a tasting menu. I had been pleasant. I had been professional. I had been functionally Dr. Seo's architect husband. Not a bad position. Also not, it turned out, anything to do with me. The woman who changed this was named Cha Mirai. She was 31, a cardiovascular researcher attached to the same hospital, Yeren's colleague, technically, though colleague implied proximity that Yeren had always held at measured distance. Mirai and I had spoken at perhaps 7 of these events over 3 years. Reliably substantive conversations, my library project, her clinical trial methodology, once an extended disagreement about whether brutalism was ethically defensible as a design movement. She had argued that it was. I had enjoyed that. She called me on Thursday. My direct line, not the office general number, which meant she'd had it somewhere from before, or had found it through effort. "Kang Junho-si," she said. "This is awkward, and I'm going to acknowledge that up front because I dislike performing unawareness." "Cha Mirai-si," I said. "Hello." "I heard. I'm not calling about that. I'm calling because I heard wrong. I heard one version, and I have some professional experience with skewed data sets." "You're saying you want the other version," I said. "I'm saying I'd like coffee with someone who argues about brutalism intelligently. And if the honest version of events is attached to that offer, then I'll take it." A pause. On my end. "Tomorrow," I said. "There's a place near Mapo that does pour-over properly." "I know it," she said. 1 o'clock. She hung up before I could. I sat with the phone for a moment. Noted that for the first time in a week, something had happened that was entirely new. Not a continuation, not a consequence. Something that had not existed before, and now did. Rule 4. New things are not replacements. They are entirely their own category. The coffee place near Mapo was called Maru. Low ceilings, exposed concrete, pour-over bar along one wall. The kind of place where no one performed being at ease because no one needed to. I had been coming here since before the library commission. I had never brought Yeren. She preferred places with better lighting for reading. She arrived 4 minutes early, which I noted, and sat down across from me without the elaborate social preamble that people deploy when the circumstances of a meeting are complicated. "Before we start," she said, "I want to be clear that I am not here as anyone's representative, and I am not relaying information to anyone. I'm here as a civilian." "Understood," I said. "Also, the pour-over here is genuinely excellent, and I've been meaning to come back since March." I liked her immediately. I had liked her before, at the edges of other people's events, but there it had been a careful, bounded liking. She was my wife's colleague, and I was her colleague's husband, and the architecture of that arrangement required certain distances. Now those structures didn't exist. "What version did you hear?" I asked. She wrapped both hands more firmly around the cup. that you ended it suddenly, after she'd spent the night supporting a critically ill former patient, that she's been professional about it but understandably shaken, that you were, she paused, not available to her during a crisis. That is, I said slowly, an impressive piece of architecture. I thought so too, she said. The load-bearing elements are all correct, just applied to a different structure than the one that actually stood. We looked at each other. She was, I realized, doing what I did, reading the geometry of things, finding where the angles didn't meet. The night she spent at the hospital, I said. I was also at the hospital. I know, she said. Room 407. Barham filed your accident report through the firm's insurance. Park Ji-hoon was her patient? I asked. Transferred. She removed herself from his care officially, but she was present for several hours. Mireille chose her words like she chose her evidence, only what could be confirmed. He and she have a history. Most of the department knows this. She has never been asked about it directly. No, I said. She wouldn't have allowed that. No, Mireille agreed. She is very good at architecture of a different sort. I almost smiled. Almost. It was too close to still being a wound for a real smile. But the almost was there, and I noticed it. We talked for 2 hours, not about Yaren, after the first 15 minutes, about the library project. She had strong opinions about public space design, about her trial methodology, about the question of whether any design space could be genuinely neutral or whether form was always a form of argument. When I left, I noticed I had not thought about the sore ribs since approximately the moment she sat down. The social restructuring began, as these things do, through small actions that don't appear to be actions. The architecture community is smaller than it appears. The gallery opening for the Seoul Urban Design Review was an event I had attended every year for 6 years, first alone, then as Yaren's husband, and now alone again in a way that felt more accurate than either previous incarnation. I knew everyone in the room. More precisely, everyone in the room knew me as an architect, not as Dr. Seo's husband. This was the distinction I had, in the years of the marriage, allowed to become blurred. I had shown up to Yaren's world wearing the costume of her husband and arrived at my own world still wearing it. The architecture community had received the costume politely and looked for me behind it, and I had not always been fully present to be found. That evening, I was present. At 9 o'clock, across the gallery space, I saw someone I had not expected. Dr. Park Ji-hoon was at the opening, not a guest of the architecture community. He had arrived with a woman I recognized as the marketing director of a development firm, a client-adjacent connection. He looked precisely as recovered as a man who had never been in genuine danger. I studied him for a moment with the detached professional curiosity I might apply to a competing design firm's portfolio. He was well constructed, pleasant to look at. The kind of face that made people want to believe the best without asking for evidence. I understood then, with a clarity that required no emotion, only geometry, exactly what Yaren had seen, and exactly what she had chosen. Park Ji-hoon's gaze found mine across the room. He held it for 1 second. 2. A social assay, checking the temperature of an unknown element. He offered the faintest professional nod. I returned it. The same, exact measure. Then I turned and resumed my conversation with the Deputy Director of Urban Planning. Rule 5. Do not give the person who hurt you the gift of your reaction. Keep it. Use it elsewhere. After the gallery, I walked home through Mapo. The ribs were better. 4 weeks out, the sharpest pain had subsided to a dull remonstrance. The city was that particular September dark that smells like cooling concrete and turned leaves, and I walked with my hands in my coat pockets and felt something I had not felt in several years. Unoccupied. in the specific sense of owning all the interior space. The Mapo Library project needed a decision, a materials change, on the east-facing reading wall. The original specification called for glass curtain paneling, which was beautiful, but had proven, in the simulation data, to create afternoon glare conditions incompatible with the stated purpose of the space. I had been thinking about this for 3 weeks, and the answer arrived the way good design solutions usually arrive. Not in a flash of inspiration, but in the middle of something else entirely. I had been making French press coffee, thinking about the angle of autumn light through the kitchen window, when I understood that the problem was not the glass, but the orientation. Rotating the reading alcoves 9 degrees from the south wall would catch morning light without the afternoon penalty. It required renegotiating the structural plans, which required the contractor to have a conversation with his engineers, which required everyone to agree to 2 additional weeks. They agreed. The contractor complained professionally and then agreed. The City Commission signed off on the modification. 2 additional weeks. Small victories are underrated. They are the actual texture of a life working, not the groundbreaking ceremonies or the ribbon cuttings, but the day you solve the glare problem and the room becomes 9 degrees and 2 weeks later, what you intended it to be. Mireille brought lunch to the studio that Thursday. Not a romantic gesture, or not primarily. She had been near the studio for a meeting and had reasoned, aloud in a text message, that if she was bringing lunch to herself, it required no additional effort to bring 2. This was, I was learning, characteristic of how she operated. Emotional offerings framed as logistical efficiency, warm intentions armored in practicality. She sat in Oh Soo-jin's chair, Soo-jin was at lunch herself, and ate and looked at the library model while I ate and looked at her looking at it. "The reading alcoves," she said. "They're rotated from the wall." 9 degrees, I said. "For the light?" "Morning light. It was a glare problem." She considered this. "So, instead of blocking the thing that was causing harm, you changed the angle of reception." I set down my chopsticks. "Yes," I said. She looked at me then, and we were not, at that moment, talking about the library. 9 degrees is a small rotation, she said. "It's enough," I said. She nodded. Returned to her food, but with a slight curve at the corner of her mouth that she directed at the architectural model and not at me, which I appreciated. She knew the difference between something being said and something being performed. She had been trained in rigorous distinction between the two. The narrative Yeren had constructed, the one Mirai had outlined for me over pour-over coffee, had by 6 weeks out consolidated itself into the version of events circulating among the Seungwon professional social circle. I had not contested it. I had not offered an alternative. I had simply been elsewhere in other configurations, building other things. I know this because Bahram attended and reported back, which he would characterize as reconnaissance, and I would characterize as what friends do when one of them is too dignified to surveil on their own behalf. "She describes it as amicable," he said the next morning, over the too sweet coffee I had finally told him to fix. He had stared at me with genuine betrayal. "She says you both agreed the timing wasn't right and that you'd grown in different directions." "Different directions," I repeated. Her words. "And Park Ji-hoon?" I asked. Bahram considered the ceiling for a moment. He was there, with the marketing director. He and Yeren spoke naturally, as colleagues. A pause. Naturally in the way that people who have practiced speaking naturally do. "He's stable," I noted. The cardiac episode was manageable from the start. Arrhythmia that responds to medication. He was admitted and discharged inside 48 hours. Bahram looked at me. "You knew that." I had the attending physician's summary. His assistant sent it. Courtesy copy, since I was admitted the same night, same floor. And you've said nothing. To whom? I said. The people who believe the current version are going to continue believing it. That is their right, and I don't need them. The people who matter already understand the geometry. Bahram turned his coffee cup in his hands. She's going to apply for the department head position, he said. Cardiothoracic. The current head is retiring in March. I absorbed this. Good, I said. She's qualified. He looked at me as though I had said something in a language he was still learning. I mean it, I said. She is an excellent surgeon. She should have the position. Rule 6. Credit what is true, even when the source is complicated. Clean sight is a discipline. October arrived with the specific clarity of Seoul autumn. The air that comes down from the north and sharpens everything, makes the city look freshly constructed, all the edges defined. The library was in its final review phase. The reading room rotation had been approved. The east wall was being surfaced this week. I had walked the site every Tuesday for 11 months, and I had learned to read the building the way you learn to read any complex text. Slowly at first, then fluently, then in the way where you stop reading and simply understand. I found Cha Mirai on the site that Tuesday. This was not prearranged. She had a contact in the City Commission's Public Space Committee. She had mentioned this once, a research interest in how public spaces affected population health metrics, and had arranged a site visit through official channels entirely independently. On the same Tuesday, I had always walked the site. You planned this, I said. She looked up from her notebook. I planned a site visit. The day I planned it was not influenced by knowledge of your schedule. A pause. I may have asked Sujin when you typically come, she admitted. I looked at her for a moment. Then I showed her the building. This is not a small thing. Buildings at the stage before completion are intimate. They are not yet performing, not yet clothed in the surfaces that will make them public. The bones are exposed. You can see every decision at once. I had never shown anyone a site at this stage except Bahram, because Bahram worked on it too and had no choice. We walked through the entire space. She asked questions the way a researcher asks, not to perform interest, but because she had actual hypotheses she was testing. How did I know the rotation would work? What had I expected to lose by changing the structural plan late? Did I think most people would understand why the alcoves were angled, or would they just feel it without knowing why? Feel it, I said. Most people will just feel it. Is that enough? She asked. It's more than enough, I said. Feeling something real is harder than understanding something intellectual. I want the room to be felt. She lowered her head and looked at me. It will be felt, she said. Quiet. Certain. We stood in the light for a moment that neither of us rushed. November brought the official filing confirmation. The divorce was registered. Kang Junho and Seo Yerin were, in all legal and administrative senses, separate entities. I received the notification by email at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, between the structural review for the East Wall and a call with the City Commissioner's office. I read it once, filed it, made myself a note in the administrative folder on my desktop. Filing complete. November 7th. Then I took the call with the Commissioner's office, which ran long and productive, and I did not permit myself to return to the notification until the day's work was finished. At 6:30, I sat at my desk alone. The studio had emptied. I opened the email again. 3 years and 2 months. I tried to conduct a kind of honest accounting, not grief inventory and not self-recrimination, something more structural. What had this building been, and what remained of its materials? What remained? I was better at scheduling than I had been. I had been forced, by Yerin's hours and her demands on social time, to become efficient with my own. I had met Bahram's extended professional network through her events and had built from that. I had learned, from watching someone operate at the absolute top of their field, exactly what sustained excellence looked like from close range, and what it cost. She had been, in the ways that mattered professionally, an exemplary person. In the ways that mattered personally, she had treated me with the same organized care she applied to everything: efficient, thorough, and ultimately in service of her own architecture. I had fit into her design. When I stopped fitting, or when he reappeared and fit better, she had processed the change with the minimum necessary disruption. I could not even be angry at the honesty of it. She had been, in her way, consistent. She had always valued what she had made clearly above what she had been given. I had been given to her. He had been made with her, years before me, the kind of history that becomes geological in a person who does not easily release what they once built. I closed the email. I opened the library drawings. Rule 7. Build the next thing. The Mapo Public Library opened on December 14th. There is a specific quality to the moment a building receives its first public. I have been present at 3 openings now, and each time it is the same small shock. The thing that existed only in your head, then only in drawings, then only in structure, becomes inhabited, becomes used, becomes, in the instant of use, something that no longer belongs entirely to you. The city commissioner gave a speech. The head of urban planning gave a speech. Bahram stood beside me and said nothing, which was the correct choice. The speeches described the building in ways that were accurate to its stated intentions and somewhat approximate to its actual qualities. Then the doors opened, and people went in. I saw the old man in the reading alcove light. I had designed that specific thing, that specific angle, that specific quality of morning light at this specific time of year. And I had done it for a person I did not know, who I would never know, who would stand in it not knowing I had stood in a kitchen at 7 a.m. thinking about autumn sun and a French press, and solved it. He stood in it for perhaps 40 seconds. Then he moved on. 40 seconds was sufficient. Mireille found me near the architecture exhibit in the lobby. Documentation of the design process. The city had insisted on it, and I had contributed drawings and construction photographs. She was looking at the drawing showing the original east wall plan and the revised 9-degree rotation. "This is the one," she said. "Yes. It looks so small on paper." 9 degrees is very small," I said. "It changes everything." She turned from the drawing and looked at me. The light in the lobby was the best light in the building. I had specified it that way. A tall, north-facing window that caught winter sky without glare. "Junho-si," she said. The first time she had used my given name without the formal register. "Miresi," I said. She smiled. Small. Real. "Buy me coffee after this?" "Yes," I said. There is a kind of social reckoning that happens not through confrontation, but through the passage of time applied to an accurate record. I did not plan it. I did not engineer it. I simply waited with patience, an architect's patience, for the structure others had built to behave according to its actual load-bearing capacity. The department head position for cardiothoracic surgery was announced in February. The applicants were reviewed by a committee. Yaren was the most technically qualified candidate by objective metric: her publication record, her surgical outcomes, her departmental tenure. This was correct and fair, and I had always believed she would get it. The committee had concerns, not about her surgical record, about her judgment. I know this because Mireille told me, and Mireille told me not as an offering, but because I asked directly, and she believed in accurate information over comfortable omissions. A complaint had been filed by the attending physician who had managed Park Ji-hun's cardiac case. Not against Yaren personally, against the informal consultation arrangement, a senior physician providing unpaid consultation-adjacent support for a transferred patient outside official oversight channels. A protocol issue. The kind of protocol issue that hospitals take seriously when they are evaluating someone for administrative leadership. She'll survive it, I said. It won't disqualify her permanently. No, Mireille agreed. She's too good at her actual work. But the position went to Dr. Hahn. He's 62, and he'll retire in 2 years, and she'll be the obvious candidate at that point. 2 years is significant, I said. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. She'll use them well, I said finally. Mireille studied me. You're not pleased, she said. An observation, not an accusation. No. Why not? I thought about the honest answer. Because she hurt me through a failure of judgment, not a failure of ability. And watching her judgment be publicly questioned doesn't address the thing that actually happened. Mireille was quiet for a moment. Then, what would address it? Nothing external, I said. That's the answer. It's already addressed. She reached across the table and put one hand over mine for a moment. Not dramatically. A brief, factual warmth. The kind that says, I see what you just did, and it is the right thing. Then she picked up her coffee and returned to arguing about whether Zaha Hadid's organic forms constituted a meaningful rupture with or a sophisticated continuation of the brutalist tradition. She thought rupture. I thought continuation. We argued for an hour and both refused to concede, which was, I was learning, the specific texture of how we were together. And I found it, without reservation, the most comfortable I had been in years. In March, a new commission came in. A private client, tech sector, significant resources, the kind of brief that arrives not through the public tender system but through referral, which means someone you've worked with before told someone else your name, which means reputation has traveled further than you personally went. The brief was for a mixed-use residential and research facility in Seongsu. The client wanted integrated design, architecture that specifically supported the health and focus of its residents, referencing recent research on environmental cognition and spatial well-being. I read that line twice. Then I called Mireille. I need a research consultant, I said when she answered. Good morning, she said. Good morning. I need a research consultant on spatial well-being. For a commission. A pause. This is a professional inquiry. Yes? Paid? Obviously. I want to be on the structural decisions too, she said. That's not how architecture firms work. I'll convince you otherwise, she said. Send me the brief. She did convince me. Not all the structural decisions, but she was present for all the environmental design specifications, and the conversations we had while developing the brief were the most genuinely productive I had experienced on a commission, because she approached every question as a researcher. What does the evidence say? And what do we know we don't know yet? Rule 8. Find the person who tells you what you don't know. Keep them close. The commission was signed in April. The Seongsu project would take 2 years. I did the geometry of that with a quiet, private pleasure. 2 years of this. One morning in April, very early, I was at the studio alone. The commission drawings were spread across 3 tables. I made coffee, the French press 2 minutes over, and stood at the window with the cup and looked at the city coming awake. I thought about the night in the ambulance, the phone unanswered, the room 407 with its north-facing window. I thought about the kitchen table at 8:47 in the morning. I thought about the filing cabinet labeled administrative, marriage. I thought about the gallery and Barham's too sweet coffee and the 40 seconds an old man stood in the reading alcove light. I thought about 9 degrees, small rotations. Enough. The last time I saw Yeren was not dramatic. It was a Thursday afternoon in May at the Han River Park near Dongjak Bridge. I had been there for no significant reason. I sometimes walked there to think about horizontal distances, the way the river manages to be both there and not there, always moving, always the same. She was coming from the opposite direction. This is how things end in real life, without staging. She was in civilian clothes, a white linen shirt and dark slacks, hair down. She looked, I noticed with the honesty the situation required, exactly as she always had. Measured, precise, beautiful in the architectural sense. A face composed of intentional lines. She saw me at approximately the same moment I saw her. The path was wide enough that neither of us had to acknowledge the other. We both knew this simultaneously. She didn't take the wider path. Neither did I. We met in the middle of the path at a normal walking pace and stopped. The river continued past us doing what rivers do. Junho-shi, she said. Yerin-si, I said. The title shift. We had stopped using each other's names without honorifics somewhere in the second year. Now it was back. Clean, precise. You look well, she said. You too, I said. And I meant it. She did. A pause. The river made its sound. That low, constant presence. The specific music of moving water that doesn't need acknowledgement to continue. The library, she said. I visited. Last month. What did you think? She considered for a moment. The reading alcoves. The light in them. Yes, I said. I stood in one longer than I planned to, she said. I nodded once. We stood for another moment in the ordinary way of two people who once shared architecture and now share only the recognition of what was built and what it cost. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, I said. She walked past me, south toward the bridge. I continued north. The river ran between us, parallel to both paths, carrying everything in one direction. I did